August 1944, England, the war was loud somewhere else, here inside. The pub, it was just warm, the kind of warm that comes from too many bodies in too small a room, from coal, smoke and spilled beer, and the particular noise of men who have been frightened for a long time, trying very hard to forget it. For one evening, Lance Corporal Thomas Briggs of the 7th Armored Division was on his third pint. He had come back from Normandy 6 days ago with a cracked collarbone, a ringing in his left ear that the medical officer said might be permanent, and a strong opinion about how he intended to spend his recovery, leave the White Hart. Every night until they sent him back, he was sitting with 4 other men from his squadron. 2 of them were also recovering from wounds. One was on compassionate leave after his brother died at Hill 112. The 5th was simply drunk, which was its own kind of recovery. At the table next to them sat 3 black American soldiers, supply corps. They had been in England for months. Their unit ran fuel convoys between the southern ports and the forward depots, hard, unglamorous, essential work that nobody in the newspapers wrote about. Their names were Corporal James from Tennessee, Private Wendell Cross from Georgia, and Private First Class Aaron Moore from Virginia. They had been to the White Hart twice before. The barman knew their order. The conversation between the 2 tables had started the way conversations start between soldiers from different armies in pubs, slowly, through glances and nods, then a comment about the beer, then an argument about whether American cigarettes or British ones were worse, then laughter, then rounds being shared across the gap between the tables, as if the gap wasn't there at all. If you're the kind of person who wants to know the story's history buried, subscribe now and share this with someone who'd want to hear it. This channel exists for exactly this. Then the door opened. 3 U.S. military police stepped inside, white helmets catching the light, eyes moving across the room in the practiced way of men who do this regularly. Thomas Briggs watched them over the rim of his pint glass and felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with his cracked collarbone. The MPs had been running this circuit for weeks, and the surrounding towns were thick with American troops, and American command had issued clear instructions. Black and white soldiers did not share establishments the policy existed in writing. It was enforced by men in white helmets with batons on their belts, in the full authority of the United States Army behind them. More than 150 black American soldiers were stationed in Britain by mid-1944. They drove the trucks, they ran the fuel lines, they unloaded the ships that fed the invasion, the Red Bull Express, the massive supply operation that would eventually move 12,500 tons of supplies per day across France, was built on the labor of these men. Without them, the Allied advance stalled. With them, it moved. But the U.S. Army's position was unambiguous. These men were soldiers second and black men first in the eyes of their own command. Jim Crow did not stay in America when the troop ship sailed across the Atlantic. The regulations and the MP armbands and the quiet pressure placed on British hosts to cooperate. Most of the time the pressure worked. Pub owners were visited, landlords were advised, British officers were asked to look the other way. The official guidance from British High Command was careful and consistent. Maintain alliance harmony, defer to American military authority on matters of American internal discipline, do not create diplomatic friction. The MPs at that night had every reason to expect this to go the usual way. Lead MP pointed at Cross and Moore. "You 3 outside now." Thomas Briggs set his pint down. He had been a soldier for 4 years. He had driven a tank through the western desert and into and across the beaches of Normandy. He had seen men burned inside vehicles and men shot coming out of them. He was 26 years old and felt much older than that, and had a very precise understanding of what it felt like to be sitting somewhere you had a right to be and have someone tell you that you didn't. He turned to the MP, what's the charge? He asked. The MP looked at him, the British accent. Registered, the desert rat insignia on the shoulder. Registered, this isn't your concern, soldier. I'm asking what they've done, Briggs said. His voice was level, his accent was thick enough that the American had to concentrate to follow it. Specific charge, what is it? They're in violation of segregation policy, out of bounds. Colored troops aren't permitted. Colored troops, said Private Danny from the other end of the table. He said it the way you repeat something back to check you've heard it right. That's correct. Now step aside. Looked at Briggs. Briggs looked at, was very still. Cross had his hands flat on the table. Moore was watching the MP with an expression that had closed itself off completely, like a shutter coming down. The expression of a man who had been through this before and knew exactly how it went and had stopped expecting it to go any other way. That expression, Briggs would say years later, was the thing that decided it for him. He stood up, not aggressively, not quickly. He just stood up in the way that a large man who has been in a war stands up when he has made a decision. These men are our guests, he said. They're staying. The other men from Briggs's table stood up, not all at once, one at a time, in the unhurried way of people who are very sure about what they're doing. The MP's jaw tightened. You're interfering with a lawful military order. American military order, said Corporal Pete Harding, who had lost 3 fingers at Villas and was therefore not in generous mood. We're British soldiers. A British pub with guests of ours. Your orders don't reach this far. I'll have you reported. All of you report away, Briggs said. The standoff lasted approximately 2 minutes. In those 2 minutes, 4 things happened. Barman put down what he was doing and moved to the end of the bar closest to the British soldiers. 3 other British soldiers from a different table stood up and crossed the room without being asked. The landlord came out from the back, looked at the situation, and told the MPs quietly and without heat that he'd like them to leave his establishment. And the MP looked around the room and counted people and did a calculation. He pointed a finger at Briggs. This isn't finished. And then he left. His men followed. The door closed. The pub was quiet for a moment. Then someone at the bar called for a round. The barman poured it. The British soldiers sat back down. Briggs looked at who looked like a man trying to find the right words for something that didn't quite have them. Sorry about that, Briggs said, which was not quite the right thing to say, but was what came out. Was quiet for a moment. Then he said, no, don't be sorry, thank you. The American MPs came back not that night, 3 days later, and not to but to British military headquarters in with a formal written complaint and an American major who delivered it with the controlled anger of a man trying to stay professional about something he found outrageous. The complaint was specific. British enlisted men had actively obstructed American military police the execution of lawful orders. They had used their presence to physically prevent the enforcement of segregation regulations. They had created a precedent that was already spreading. In the week since the White Hart incident, there had been 4 similar confrontations in a lone. British soldiers were treating obstruction of American MPs as acceptable behavior. This had to stop. The British colonel who received the complaint listened to all of it. He was a man named Career Infantry, but Dunkirk survivor, not given to speeches. He asked the American major one question: were the soldiers in question, the American soldiers your men were trying to remove, had they committed any offense under British law? The major said that was not the relevant standard. The relevant standard was American military policy set in British establishments on British soil, with British soldiers present as witnesses. The relevant standard is British law. Those men had committed no offense. My soldiers had every right to object to their removal. He paused. Be passing that position of the chain. Expected to hold, it held not. Officially, nothing was ever written down that could embarrass the alliance. But the message moved through British units in the area with the quiet efficiency of things that are understood rather than ordered. British establishments were British territory. Black American soldiers drinking in them were guests of their British counterparts. MPs attempting to remove them without cause would find British soldiers in the way. Incident was the moment the line was drawn. After that, it was the line for the men of the American supply units who heard what had happened. The news moved the way important things move through formations, through truck cabs, during long convoy runs, through mess halls and bunk rooms, through the invisible networks that connect men who are stationed near each other and share the same dangers without being in the same army. Corporal James wrote to his sister in Memphis in September 1944. Letter survived. He described the night at the White Hart in 2 paragraphs. He described Thomas Briggs standing up 1 sentence, then he wrote these: British soldiers, they don't see it the same way our army does. They see us as soldiers, same as them. I don't know if I can explain what that feels like unless you've spent time somewhere that didn't. Aaron Moore, the private from Virginia, was killed in France, October 1944, when his fuel convoy was strafed by a German fighter that should not have been in that sector. He had been driving for 16 hours straight. He was 22. Thomas Briggs survived the war. He went home to Newcastle and worked in the shipyards. He never sought attention for what happened at the White Hart. When his son asked him about it in the 1970s, he said he barely remembered it. His son didn't believe him. What happened in the pubs in the summer of 1944 was not a revolution. American army remained segregated until 1948. Black soldiers returned home to a country that still told them where they could sit and where they could not. Men who drove the Red Ball Express and unloaded the ships and ran the fuel convoys received none of the recognition they were owed for what they built and what it cost them. But in those pubs, in those hours, something true happened. British soldiers who had been through the desert and Dunkirk and Normandy looked at men who had crossed the same ocean to fight the same enemy and reached the only conclusion that made sense to them: same war, same enemy, same table. When American MPs came to enforce a different logic, they found British soldiers already standing, not because anyone ordered it, not because there was a policy or a directive or a speech, because Thomas Briggs had set his pint down and stood up, and the men at his table had stood up with him. And in the particular grammar of soldiers who trust each other, that was enough. The White Hart is still there, and the coal smoke is gone. The ration books are long gone. The men who drank there in 1944 are mostly gone too. But on an August night 80 years ago, in the warm and crowded dark of an pub, British Lance Corporal with a cracked collarbone asked a simple question: what's the charge? And there wasn't one. And that was the whole